That's where our stripping guide's going to go. You can see there I've pre-prepared the guide foot, just ground it so I get a nice smooth even ramp up to the guide foot. And because I want to put a trim in the centre, we just mark the centre. To start with, it all seems fingers and thumbs, but once you work out where they go, so you can see I've just wrapped it around, finger on top to keep the tension, and then just cross it over. That way your loose bit or your tag end ends up underneath. A few times round, pull that tight, trim it off. Once you get close to your centre point, we want to put our metallic trim in there. A spiral is probably the easiest thing to do. We're just going to do it at double thickness. Just double that up. I'm using metallic A in gold. Layer that in there like so. Then once you get close, grab those two ends, put them under, and lay them all nice and even. Make sure they don't twist, so we go one. The second one goes right on our centre line. You can see I'm using the thread to pull that across on itself to get rid of those gaps. And three. Now try and come in and out at the same point. So we've started there, we're going to exit exactly opposite it. So we go under, like so. Keep the tension on there. I'm using that thread again to pull that across. 1/2 centimetre or so in. Trim that off. The big trick is always try and keep some tension on or you end up with your loose ends, and that's where it comes undone. Now to finish off, we just put a loop underneath. So we're going to pull that thread back under itself. We're just past our white line. Now I use nail clippers here because once I put that in there through that loop, pull that through so it's just under, and I can get in nice and close to pull that through. You can see we end up with no end. And you can just use that, push in towards the centre, get rid of your gaps, and then the shape that is, pull your metallic tight, you can get in nice and close, and it just springs back under. A little bit sticking up the top there. The guide now goes on top. Once you've done a few, you get to guess roughly where the centre point is. Tape that on. We're just going to overbind in black now. Start it the same way. We've just left about 5 threads or so. So we've got a bit of contrasting colour there. Again, I'm just using that to pull it over so I've got a straight line. You see this is where our ramp that we pre-ground comes in handy most of the time. If you end up with that, you can just wind back and just take off again. Loop under. So pull it in firm so we can let go, trim that off, pull that through. And in the case of those little gaps there, you can see the metal through there. Again, you can just push that in and get rid of those gaps. So ProCoat do a very good preloaded epoxy syringes so you can get equal amounts of both halves, A and B. Just take the cap off. We're only just going to do a couple of guides. Slip that into the 2 mil of each will be enough to do this rod. You're better off to mix less and mix up another batch if you have to, rather than mix up a big batch and waste it. So make sure you've got a good thorough mix. Epoxies can be very temperamental, So the cleaner you keep everything and the less contaminants, the better off you are. If you get a heap of bubbles, just a little bit of warm air on it will burst those bubbles. So we now let that sit for a minute or so, let the reaction start happening and those little bubbles burst. I always find it's better a couple of light coats than one big thick heavy one. That way it soaks through. So just get your band of epoxy and run it around. You can see how nicely it starts soaking in there. It's a good habit to get into, to always work towards your centres. Just press down on the brush to push some epoxy in underneath. And this is what we want. See how it's soaked in there? That way we know the epoxy's gone right through the thread and bonding onto the blank. So don't get tempted to put more on it. That's more than enough for our first coat. Also, it reduces the amount of bubbles. You can see we've got very, very few bubbles there. Missed a little bit there. So when you do the next coat or the third coat, you end up with a very, very clear finish, which is what all custom rod builders try and get, a nice, clear, even finish with minimal bubbles. So then this has to keep turning for about 4 hours. Again, if you get any bubbles, you can just give it a little light blow. The warm air disperses the bubbles. If you're doing a lot of rods, you can use a little butane burner because the heat draws the oxygen out of the epoxy. It's got a nice luster to it there now. So there we have it, the finished rod, all the runners on, epoxy's nice and dry and hard, grips aren't going to move on us. To start with, the spacings are a little bit hard, and that's where you go and buy a copy of Fishing World, where you'll find this recipe in the pages there, or on their website. Once you've built one, I'm sure it won't be your last.